Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, May 21st, 2024 City Council meeting. The meeting is hereby called to order. Members of the public may watch and listen remotely by viewing the meeting on Channel 8 WCTV at the city's website at www.wayzata.org/WCTV. Public comment during the public forum and/or public hearing portions of the meeting may be provided in person at the meeting in advance or by logging into the Zoom call, where you will be seen and heard in our council chambers and the cable channel. You will be asked to unmute and then you may begin your comment. All public comments must include your full name and address. All right. We are, let's see. At the beginning of our meeting, we will now do the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody could please follow along. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Next item on the agenda is the roll call. Let the record reflect that all members of the council are in attendance this evening. Next up, we have our approval of the agenda. Would anyone care to approve the agenda as is, or would anyone care to make any changes?
So moved.
To approve the agenda as is?
To approve the agenda, yes, Madam Mayor.
Very good, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, the motion passes. Also would like to note this evening that the City Council did have a workshop prior to the meeting where we discussed the following items. We received an update of the Environmental Health Delegation Agreement with the City of Minnetonka, a discussion of proposed updates to our franchise fees ordinance for gas and electric utilities, and we also conducted a review of the draft special event permit. All right, next up on the agenda this evening is a public forum where we will receive an update of the Panaway Lake Walk and Docks construction by Bob Jansen of Kraus Anderson Construction. Before we get to that, I'd like to invite any members of the public that are here this evening if they would like to speak, we would ask that they please fill out a card that's located at the back of the room, hand it to staff. And for those that are attending via Zoom, I don't know if anybody is, no? We may need to assess if we continue using Zoom since it seems that we don't have much, or if any attendance.
Correct, yeah.
Via Zoom. But if anybody does join via Zoom, we would ask that they please raise their hand and let staff know that they would like to make a comment, and then we will require that the camera be turned on, and understanding that they will be seen and heard in council chambers as well. All right, so with that, City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I didn't get any cards, so I think at this point we only have the one item on the agenda for public forum, and that is just a general overall construction update where we're at with the Lake Walk and the community docks from Bob Jansen. He's been our executive project manager from Kraus Anderson. Prior to just Bob giving us a construction update, I just want to mention just where we're at with the budget, high level update. The overall project is about $1.5 million project. And thanks to, despite increased contingency costs based on just the uniqueness of the project and the amount we've had to pile, given the quality or the type of soils that we have underneath the lake. Despite going over in contingency, because of the Conservancy's commitment to fund $220,000 for the cabinet for the docks, which look beautiful, I may add. And then also because of the sales tax exemption that we received through the legislative process last year of about $250,000. Right now, we are under budget of the entire project, about $50,000. And we're not there yet. We still have a few dotting of the I's and crossing of the T's that we need to do. punch-out list, I guess is probably a better way of saying that. But we're pretty confident that we're going to get there on budget. So good news.
Fantastic, thank you.
And I'll hand it over to Bob to just let us know where we're at with construction. Let the community know where we're at with construction, because
Yeah.
there's a lot going on right now.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there is plenty happening right now. Hopefully everyone can see we're coming up on the end, though. We can all see the light at the end of the tunnel on this project. It's per Mr. Dahl's discussion. Yeah, I mean, during the winter, we had some unknowns come up with soil conditions in the bottom of the lake. We've been able to work our way through that. It did affect schedule a little bit. So you can see we're still wrapping up out there. Really out there, this is a big week and going into next week. So I mean, most trades are wrapped up with their work or punching out. As you can see, the docks, they are demobbing this week, so the docks will be open this weekend. We're working on wrapping up the carpentry aspect of the project, the overall decking, and the top rail of the railing system is going to be going on. There's going to be pieces of the decking aspect and the top rail that are going to trickle into next week. We'll have to wrap those up, but the plan is to wrap all that up next week. But for going into this weekend, the plan would be to have the public docks open and the access to get up to the shore open as well. So you will see some barricades this weekend up on the panway. We'll be able to open up what we can. Depending on how the next few days go, you'll see those barricades set up on the actual panway to just make sure it's kept safe. But there will be some areas that we'll have to kind of make sure we're restricting use of. But going into next week, we should be able to wrap up, mainly put in the rest of those decks, put in the top rail, and wrap up the project. We will have some step-down work that we have to do with the panway, because there is 2 step-downs that come down to the water. Those, we've got all the parts. The only thing we're waiting on is the water is high right now. So right now, the water would be over those step-down locations, just of where it's at. So as soon as the water comes down and allows, we'll be jumping out there again with Zenith, and they will put those step-downs in. And that would be the last component that we would need on the project. But electrical, the lighting wrapped up today for install. Most of the steel work and the railing system is installed with the cables. It's just really that wood top rail that needs to go on, so, yeah.
It's exciting. It's like waiting for that final little piece to complement your outfit, and then you're all put together for the big event. All right. Excellent. Any questions from the council? Yes, Councilmember Perkill.
So on the step downs, is that something we're going to take in and out as the water level changes? So when we have high water like now, the normal railing will be there, and when the water's lower and you need to step down to a lower lake, they'll be put in?
Correct.
And who does that? Each year and twice a year maybe, or?
Yep, so typically it would be installed in the spring, and it would be removed at the end of fall before winter comes. So each step down is made up of 3 components that go on. It would be similar to the work that we would do when you would take out your temporary dock systems. But they are gonna look a little different than what the main panway looks like. Like, they are meant to allow water to hit them. They are grates. So lighter gauge steel, they're not the precast and timber like you have throughout the rest of the system. So it's going to be a great system with more aluminum and galvanized material. So.
And Public Works is going to take over this?
Yeah,
Going
good
forward?
question, Councilmember Parkhill. We'll have to see how difficult it is to take them on and off, and determine that in later years, basically.
Okay.
Yep. So we will be working with Mike Kelly on that to make sure when we do install them that we put together a instructions, manual, video, everything to make sure that this is as streamless as possible.
Our intention is to do it in-house, but we'll see.
Okay. Any photos or anything of new ones down there?
Of the step downs, or?
No, the whole Panaway docks and everything.
Well, there's going to be a big reveal coming up here soon that I hope everybody will be attending, so.
It's a lead-in. There you go.
Yeah, it is, yes. And what is the date for our big event?
Our big event is July 13th, and we're going to talk about that later on the agenda, but that'll be the ribbon cutting ceremony. That gives us a little bit more time too to make sure everything's polished, looking good, and fully installed too, so.
Excellent. Yes, Councilmember?
I just want to add on to Jeff's question. The step downs, I thought they were going to be a permanent thing. This is the first that I've heard that they would be removed and installed on a seasonal basis. Has that been a change of scope?
No, I don't think so. The thing is that the railings have to change, so we're taking the railings off for people to allow people to access the water and step down to it. So it all kind of ties into that. But nothing's changed in terms of the scope.
I just don't remember seeing that in the renderings. Well, I've always seen the step downs, but I thought they were a permanent thing, that they stayed there, that they didn't get removed at the end of the season.
I don't know when that was fully galvanized or that was memorialized, but I know like there's some safety concerns with the ice in the winter, and that we wouldn't want to have that open where people think they can just, navigate onto the ice or open water.
Okay, so my follow-up question at some point will be to understand the impact to the maintenance budget for the.
Yeah, hopefully it's nothing, but we don't know until we go out there and install them and see how complicated of a process that is. But there could be.
Mike, they know how quickly you guys learn and how quickly you're going to do these, so keep that number down.
We're going to get Mike some scuba gear and
A snorkel. Yeah. Well, I love it. Wonderful. So we had an unusual winter, to say the least. And one would think that the warm weather would have been a benefit to us. It was and it wasn't.
Yeah.
Could
exactly.
you talk a little bit more about the impact that the weather had through the course of the project?
Yeah, so it was definitely atypical. It was, this project, we've always kind of talked about, there was components that there was a plan to access from the ice. We never got to that point this year, so there was times when we had to pivot on how we approached install of certain members of steel, being able to install electrical, different components. The docks was a big one, having to switch up how we approached that. Had a good team on the project, though. We definitely benefited, though, from the late winter. With the piling and the subsurface conditions, we had an overrun on the pile. So, with that, there was some additional time. And that was the big catalyst for the whole project, was the piling. We couldn't start anything else, really, that you see out there until the piling was complete. So we were lucky that we really didn't have ice until after the first of the year. So the crews were able to stay out there with the barges, and they were able to break ice and do what they needed to do to get the piling done, which was, it was a big achievement out there to put in the last bit of piling and to set the last of the precast. So it worked out for us from that standpoint. It was easier to adjust without having the ice. We worked it out with the dock contractor, and then that all came together very well. I think the dock system I know it's complete now. I think it looks great out there. I think that Kebony was a great choice. So I'm excited to see how everyone likes them here next week.
I'm holding off from actually going down there until it's completed. So I want the big reveal.
Yeah.
I just keep doing this every time I go down Lake Street. I try not to look.
And Madam Mayor, we are stockpiling Kleenex too for that time.
Oh, thank you. You know me so well.
Oh, for me, but.
Oh, for you. Oh, yes. Well, you deserve them too. Yes. Okay, couple quick trivia questions. I don't know if you'll know the answer because I'm going to surprise you here. I'm putting you a little bit on the spot, Bob. How many different trades do you think we had on the project?
How many different trades? We had 6 different contractors. As far as actual trades go, we really had 4 different trades. We had iron workers on site, we had electricians on site. We had operators, carpenters, and laborers as well, so 5 different trade partners as far as from a union standpoint.
Okay.
Yep.
So I would have thought we would have had more than that with the concrete and the.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it
was
with,
off-site.
because that was off-site, it was all precast concrete.
Yeah.
I mean, the pile operators, they kind of run through the operators as well, so, but, I mean, Zenith Tech carried a lot of that scope on the install.
Okay.
So, I mean, but it was 6 different contractors that have been involved in this, 2 of which were completely off-site as far as suppliers. There was
Gotcha.
4 different contractors that have been on-site during the course of the project.
How about number of tradespeople that have been on the project from the time we put the first barge in the water?
Total, I mean, we've looked through some of our logs, I mean, and we've had probably about 60 different trade partners out there
Okay.
throughout the course of the project.
Nice.
Yep,
Maybe we can invite them on the 13th. It'd be fun to celebrate with them.
yeah.
Yeah, their hard work. Good. Anything you would have done differently? I don't want to jinx anything. We're so close to the finish line. But,
I mean, there's always stuff you would do differently in retrospect, especially on a unique project like this. I mean, this is a very unique project from a lot of aspects. I mean, this does not get done very often. So, I mean, you always learn something. I mean, maybe talking with the DNR would be one, and figuring out that aspect on the schedule. But, I mean, I think the crews and the contractors that are working on this job did a great job. I mean, the people who were out in the field, it was incredible to see what they would do, especially during when we would have some of the hiccups with the piling and the weather and how that came into play. I mean, the guys out there really did a great job.
so I'm curious. I would see them sometimes at the beginning when the precast was there, and they're in waders in the water, bolting things together. How in the world did they stay warm?
I mean,
It's cold out there, and they
Yeah.
are out there all day long.
yeah, it was cold. I mean, making sure we had a good setup, a good rotation, making sure guys were getting into the trailer, warming up, making
Okay.
sure to take the breaks that they needed to be taking. I mean, they didn't have the proper equipment. I mean, there was definitely that time in December and going into January where we were doing a lot of like marine welding and a lot of assemble. So there was a lot of guys in the water during that time. But yeah, I mean, they would stay out there, work hours, and it's great to see they never took a time to rush it. They were making sure the quality was there like every day. So
That's
it was.
fantastic.
Yeah, I can't stress enough how great the crews out there have been.
That's wonderful, and frankly, a testament to the hard work that, Kraus Anderson put in, and Onyx and staff, and Civitas in terms of the communication before we ever got started, and vetting this out before we went to bid with the different contractors that were available. So, thank you all for your hard work, and there'll be more praise on the 13th of July, but until then, that's exciting news and staying under budget. So thank you for that, and to the Conservancy for their ongoing efforts and making up that difference so we could have such a beautiful product at the end of the day. So thank you very much, Bob.
Well, thank you, and yeah, definitely are appreciative to let Kraus Anderson play a part in this. It's been an awesome project to be a part of.
Oh, fantastic. So, yeah, we're super excited to, we'll make sure we cordon it off to allow for the council to take the maiden voyage down the lake walk.
Like that. Maiden
All right.
voyage.
The maiden voyage, yes. So, fantastic. Well, thank you again for all your efforts. And what's the final date?
Final date, we're with drop downs, we're shooting to have that end of June.
Okay.
The drop downs, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, great. Well, weather's looking, well, not today. It's raining pretty hard. It's pretty wet and soggy, but we've had a good spring, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely.
And if there's one thing that we all know is that the lake levels, they will go down and they will go back up again. So
Yep.
It's ever evolving. All right, perfect. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
All right, we are still in the public forum. City manager, do we have any cards or anybody online who would like to speak?
Madam Mayor, we do not.
Okay, perfect. Then we will move on to the next agenda item, which is new agenda items, and that's an opportunity for members of the council to propose an item for discussion at a later meeting. Anything? No. All right, then I will move on to the consent agenda. And this evening, we have the following items on the consent agenda for your approval. Approval of the city council workshop and regular meeting minutes of May 7, 2024. Approval of the check register. Approval of municipal licenses. Receipt of the building activity report. Approval of contract with Benefit Extras, Inc. for Cobra Continuation Administration Services. Approval of the mediated settlement agreement between the City of Wayzata and Minnesota-Wisconsin Playground, Inc. Approval of the Hennepin County Active Living Grant Agreement for Panaway Ribbon Cutting Event. Approval of professional services agreement, with Zan Associates for Panaway Ribbon Cutting Event. And receipt of the 2024 first quarter financial report. Members of the council, do any of you have any questions about those items or wish to pull an item for further discussion? No? And would someone care to make a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as outlined.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Which takes us to new business, and the first item under new business this evening is to consider approval of a special event permit for the Panaway Ribbon Cutting Event. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to give a brief presentation of the agenda item and answer any questions. This item is for what we were just talking about with the grand opening of Panaway. So knowing this was that we wanted to celebrate and really recognize all of our partners and again, celebrate, not only just for the council and all the project partners, but for the community, since this has been such a long-term initiative that a lot of us put our blood, sweat, and tears in. So staff reached out to the key project partners, council, Chamber, KA, the Conservancy, Onyx, and several others, and facilitated a meeting to kind of come up with, what really we wanted to accomplish for a celebration. And you can see on this slide, kind of the parameters that we're at right now is it will be a ribbon cutting event to celebrate the completion of the Lake Walk and docks. In addition to that, obviously, we're going to celebrate. It's going to be fun, family-friendly, and just an opportunity to recognize all of the people that contributed, and even for the community, for all the construction traffic and all that stuff that they had to put up with, and now they have this beautiful lake walk and docks that they can utilize. So that's the what. The when. Talked about when for a long time, and we landed on July 13th on a Saturday from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. There's a lot of discussion about the date and then also the timing and wanting to strike that balance of, making sure that we're going to be able to get everybody there, but also respect businesses and wanting to not, completely disrupt the entire weekend just for the ribbon cutting as well, and wanting to make sure that commerce wouldn't be, really negatively impacted. The where, it's going to be all around the lake walk and the docks essentially, but the primary kind of celebration point will be in the plaza area. That's where the ceremony is going to be, and there'll be some other stuff. I'll mention those in a second, in and around the area. Depot and the 600 block will be the other primary areas. You can see from this slide just a general layout. Our plan is to have food, some type of food. We're still working on that. Just closing off the 600 block of Lake Street, so it gives more space, not only just for enough people to come, celebrate with us during the ribbon cutting ceremony, but also to have some art installations, as I mentioned, food, and just some other activities to make it a little bit more family friendly, similar to what we heard when we got feedback about Wayzata last year or 2 years ago about wanting to have just kind of the right amount of activity, not being too kind of overly active, but making sure that there's enough there to utilize the closed street. You can also see that there's some stuff going along the lake. We're planning on having some boat rides, the opportunity for the public to take boat rides to get out on the lake and also see the lake rock from the boater's perspective. In addition to the art installations like chalk art, we're looking at doing kind of a tour as well that we'd go to different kind of a scavenger hunt, more or less, especially for families to get involved and see the cool different components of Panaway and the lake. So overall, you can see there on the bottom, it's pretty small, but our intent is to close the road from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. on that Saturday. That's key because then we'll have the street open during kind of the dinner rush hour and still during the shopping day as well. There's a little bit more detail about the schedule. I'll just comment that this is still a work in progress. We wanted to make sure we get approval on the parameters, and we're going to be working on more of these details between now and the 13th. Props to Emily at City Hall, Jesse and Sarah at Onyx, Peter and the Chamber. We've got a great team. So I know just having those partners, it's going to be a huge success. Councilmember McDonald and Mayor, you've been on some of those meetings too. So I think we're headed in the right direction. So I'll be quiet now. Happy to answer any questions that you have, and we're looking for ultimate approval of this special event.
Wonderful, thank you. Questions from the council? Kathy?
I don't want to be a naysayer, but do we have a rain backup contingency? Or do we just bring on umbrellas?
That's a great question, and you're not a naysayer for asking that. That's a smart question. We have talked about this. Essentially, we're not going to be, we don't have a backup date. We're not going to have a backup date, but for the ceremony portion, it will be covered. So there is plans to make sure that if there's inclement weather, we are protected. And if worst case scenario, if it's severe weather, we are able to delay certain portions of it or just cancel some of it. We could even come up here if we really needed to, but we view that as a very extreme exception. If it's just not doable, then it'll just be canceled. But that's not going to happen.
Perfect, it won't. It's gonna be sunny and bright.
Yep.
There's always the parking ramp.
There's always the parking ramp. We'll have some, as I mentioned, some kind of plan Bs, but we're trying to work around that and making sure even if the weather's not great, we can still have a successful event.
Wonderful. I saw music,
Yes.
stage, live music.
We talked about that. It's probably going to be more just speakers and fun pop stuff, but that's still under consideration.
All right, very good. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, I appreciate the thoughtfulness to the hours, certainly. Even the amount of space that was closed was considered at length and the different events there. So, that sounds wonderful, and thanks to those vendors who are donating of their time and.
Yeah, their time in, as you can see from this slide, I failed to walk through that, but our partners are playing a huge part in funding the ceremony, and there will be a city portion, of course, but we do have soft costs that there's still room in our project budget that this will be incorporated into. So we're on good financial ground to move forward with this.
Well, it is definitely a significant amount of money. It's not to minimize that, but I think it's also really nice to celebrate all the people who have spent so much time, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of hours of work over all these years to get to this point. So it's good to acknowledge all of that hard work. Okay, wonderful. Well, seeing that there are no other questions, what we need at this point is someone to make a motion to approve the special event permit for the Panaway Ribbon Cutting event.
I'll make that motion, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Parkhill, in a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the motion passes. Just take us to the next item under new business, which is to consider acceptance of the city's 2023 audited financial reports. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Deputy City Manager Yeager is going to introduce this topic and introduce our primary consultant involved in the audit.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. As you may know, each year the city is required to get an audit of its financial statements. The city's retained the firm MMKR to audit our financials, and Bill Lauer, who is walking up to the podium now, is going to give you a high-level overview of our financial picture for the fiscal year of 2023 and point out any audited findings as well. Before he gets into his presentation, I just want to give a shout out to our senior accountant, Kathy Ovshak, for all the work she puts into the daily financial activity of the city, as well as then supporting MMKR through the audit process. I think Kathy, as well as Bill and his team at MMKR, have done a fantastic job. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thank you very much, Aurora, and we do appreciate all of the assistance that was provided to us by the city staff. It was once again a very efficient process. The city was ready for audit. The condition of the records were excellent, so we had a very good audit process. So what I'm going to do briefly with you this evening is try to accomplish three things quickly here. First of all, just to make some communications that were required to make sure that you understand as the body that oversees the financial reporting function of the city. Second, I'm going to walk through the results of our audit process and the opinions and report letters that we issued. And then I'll just briefly touch on a few of the very high-level financial results for the 2023 fiscal year. So I will start with discussing what our role is and making sure you understand kind of the difference in responsibilities between our firm and what the city provides. All of the data, the documentation, the notes, everything that goes into putting your financial statements together is prepared and pulled together by city staff and your contracted accounting service provider. We come in, perform the audit to provide an opinion that goes in the front of your financial statements as to whether that fairly presents your financial position and the results for the year under audit. As part of that process, you have an audit under governmental accounting standards, so we're required to evaluate your internal controls over financial reporting, your compliance with government auditing standards, and so you'll find a report letter at the back of that document with regard to our findings there. And finally, you're subject to an audit of your compliance with Minnesota laws and regulations. All local government units are subject to a similar audit. The state auditor's office puts together an audit guide that we audit to each year, and you'll find a separate report letter with regard to that. As far as the process itself, I kind of buried the lead there or mentioned early. I thought the process went very well. I think the results reflect that. Again, the records were in good condition. Things went efficiently. Hats off to Kathy and the rest of the city staff for everything that they did to prepare for us. It's never an easy thing to have somebody come in for a week and kind of disrupt normal business, and we appreciate it. As far as the results of the audit, we once again provided the city with an unmodified or referred to as a clean opinion on your financial statements. It's the highest opinion that we can provide. As far as your internal control and compliance with governmental accounting standards, the only thing that we have to report there is something that we've kind of been reporting or reminding you about each year. Because you do have a relatively small number of people in your business office, there is less than perfect segregation of duties in some of your transaction cycles. And so just kind of reminding you as the oversight body that because of that, you're kind of accepting a higher level of risk. You're putting more faith in less people, basically, than you would in a larger organization. It's cost benefit, you know, whether or not you add staff. I know you are doing so in 2024. And that condition was downgraded a few years ago from a material weakness to a significant deficiency. I know it doesn't sound better, but it is. The city has been working toward trying to strategically decide what that new person's going to do and what roles they play, and perhaps even downgrade that more or get rid of that finding altogether. So we'll see when we come back next year. From a compliance standpoint, we had nothing to report on the financial statement level. We did have one Minnesota legal compliance thing to report. One of the general disbursement claims that we tested was not paid within the 35-day statutory requirement. You have to pay any claim for vendor services or goods within 35 days of either the receipt of the goods or services or receipt of the invoice for goods or services. One of those, I think, got hung up in getting some of the approvals and didn't get processed and paid within the 35-day requirement. That's pretty much it from a report standpoint. Before I move along to some of the financial information, questions on any of that?
Any questions? No?
Seeing none, I will press on. There we go. The city maintains two different types of funds. The governmental funds are your general, special revenue, debt service, capital project funds. These are the funds that are primarily financed with property taxes, intergovernmental grants, special assessments, things of that nature. This shows your change in fund balance, kind of two different perspectives from the end of the 2022 fiscal year to the end of 2023. You had about $15.2 million in total fund balances across all of these funds. That was an increase of about $2.3 million from the year before. I'll just briefly touch on some of the changes in the different categories of fund balance there. You'll see a large decrease in non-spendable fund balance and a similar increase in unassigned fund balance. This was really caused internally. You had an internal loan, which was in your general fund in previous years, to your downtown TIF district, where you fronted some money for some development there that's being paid back through tax increments as you collect them. You moved that from your general fund and you split it, I think, between your water and sewer funds. So that went out of the general fund, so that freed that non-spendable fund balance up in the general fund and put more cash back in the general fund. So that those two are just kind of a shift in categories. The restricted fund balances increased about $1.6 million. A lot of that was in your lakefront improvement capital projects fund. That's the fund where you're accounting for all of your Panaway projects. You had some debt that you issued in that bond. That was kind of where the action was as far as your governmental funds. In 2023, you issued a $6.1 million bond. You had about $1.2 million in intergovernmental and private grants and contributions in there, and you did about $6.5 million in capital improvements in that lakefront improvement capital projects fund. You ended up with a higher amount of restricted fund balance in there for the remainder of those projects that you're wrapping up now. Also in your debt service fund, you'll see an increase there of about $373,000. That's also restricted for bond payments. And finally, that assigned fund balance went up by about $540,000. A lot of that was in those non-major capital project funds. Most of those assignments are kind of capital project related. Drilling down within the governmental funds, your general fund is your primary operating fund. This shows your year-end financial position for the last 5 years in terms of your year-end cash balance and fund balance. The cash balance is the yellow bars, the fund balance is the blue. You ended the year with cash balance and fund balance of right around $4.5 million. Fund balance went up by about $61,000, pretty close to your budget. You budgeted to break even, so it was a little better than budget. You kind of see there the relationship between cash and fund balance changed. That is that change in that interfund loan we talked about just briefly. So that was the general fund loaning that cash out the last few years, and that was moved to your enterprise funds this year. So the cash is now 1-to-1 pretty much with what your fund balance is. Your total revenues in the general fund were just under $7.2 million for the year. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page. $7.7 million for the year. And that was about 4% higher than budget, roughly $300,000. There are several areas where you were a little better than budget. Your intergovernmental grants and revenues were about $94,000 higher than budget, mainly in public safety related aids. Licenses and permits were a little more than $60,000 higher than budget. You had some larger projects in the city this year, so some of the plan check fees, things of that nature, were a little higher. The biggest area, that all other category there, was about $245,000 over budget, and the bulk of that was investment income. You're about $195,000 higher than budget. Part of that is conservative budgeting. Part of that is also kind of a turnaround from 2022. That does include some interest that you have received, but it also includes kind of a mark to fair value on your investment portfolio. All of our city clients that took a big hit in 2022, that rebounded in 2023 as the market got better. So some of the longer term investments that you're holding, that you have to mark those to fair value each year. So that's not all realized gain. But that is the main reason for that variance. General fund expenditures were about $7.2 million for the year. That was about 3.5% under budget, roughly $260,000. It was spread in several areas. Your general government expenditures were about $92,000 below budget. Most of that was in the administration and finance area. Your public works department was about $93,000 under budget, mainly personnel costs in your street maintenance and engineering areas. And your culture and recreation was about $77,000 under budget, and that was primarily in your park and rec costs. And the other fund type that the city maintains are your enterprise funds. These are funds where you're financing the full operation primarily through user fees or sales. Just to call to your attention on the bottom presentation there, where it's by fund, you did create a new enterprise fund in 2023. You're now accounting for your marina as a separate enterprise. That used to be in a governmental fund in your parks and trails fund in prior years. You have a total net position across all 7 of those funds of just over $19 million. That went up by about $1.6 million from the year before, mainly in the unrestricted portion of net position. That's basically the result of operations. You can see from the bottom there, all of these funds had positive years. The largest increase were in a couple of your utility funds. Water and sewer funds were up by about $1 million between the 2 funds. And your liquor, which puts together both your bar and grill and your off-sale liquor store, increased in your net position by about $290,000. I did include a graph on your liquor fund operation. This is a fairly unique enterprise fund because you do have both the on and off-sale aspects of it. Your net position in this fund ended the year at about $1.25 million, as I mentioned, about $290,000 up from the year before. You had gross sales of about $7.1 million, roughly $200,000 higher than the year before. That growth was primarily at the bar and grill. That was about $240,000 higher, about a 6.5% increase in sales. Liquor, your off-sale liquor was actually down by about $35,000 in gross sales. Gross profits went up by about $305,000, roughly 9%, to about $3.74 million for the year. And you had income before transfers of just under $500,000 and supported the general fund budget with transfers of about $195,000 from the liquor fund. And finally, this is a very, very abbreviated snapshot of the very first financial schedule in your financial statements, your government-wide statement and net position. So this takes all of the fund information that we talked about, converts that governmental fund information to a full accrual basis, so it's on the same accounting basis now as your enterprise funds. Also, I'll point out at the bottom there, you do account for your HRA. The city's HRA is included in the financial statements, but it's reported as a discretely presented component unit, so it's in there, but it's separate from the funds of the cities. So this is, you see that's mainly your tax increment activity. So at the end of 2023, your primary government, the city, had about $77 million in total net position across all governmental and business type activities, an increase of about 7.2 million. The business type activities relate dollar to dollar to your enterprise funds. They're on the same basis of accounting, so there's really no change there. Kind of the change is in your governmental activities. For your governmental funds, you don't report long-term assets and liabilities in the funds, so your capital assets, your bonds outstanding, your long-term employee benefits are not reported in the funds, but they are reported here, so it gives you kind of a longer-term perspective. Your total net position in your governmental activities went up by about $5.5 million. You're seeing the bulk of that was in that net investment in capital assets, and that's mainly coming from your Panaway project and the activity in that lakefront improvement fund during the year. And at the bottom, as I mentioned, your HRA component unit has a total net position of about $2.1 million. That stayed fairly unchanged. It was down about $83,000 from the year before. You do have a deficit in unrestricted net position that's in your downtown TIF districts, and that's because you did pre-fund some of those costs with that loan from the city, and you're paying that back as you collect the tax increment districts on the improvements that you did in that fund. So that's everything I intended to go through from a number standpoint. Questions on any of that, or Aurora or Jeff, if you had anything that I didn't cover that you wanted to call out?
Wonderful. Well, let's see if we have any questions from the council. No?
I'll ask one.
Yes, Councilmember Parkhill, please.
So could I just get some clarity on the business type activities, the increase of 7.2 million? Is that the investment we made in the Lake Walk?
So,
One of our, I'm just trying to figure out where we came up with.
so if you're looking at that last slide, the business type activities went up by the 1.6 million. It's just that kind of that middle third.
Okay.
So most of that was actually due to positive operating results in your enterprise funds. That top third is your governmental activities, and that's where, if you look at that net investment in capital assets that went up by about $4.3 million, that wraps up a number of things. It's the value of your capital assets, less any depreciation or amortization, less any outstanding bonds, and that's where you see that increase due to the Panaway improvements.
So the 4.3 was the Panaway improvements?
Yes.
Predominantly. I'm just wondering where a big number came from. Okay.
Correct.
And the 1.6 is really related to the liquor fund? Or the
No,
bar
that,
grill, or is that what you said?
if you.
Said enterprise funds.
I'm gonna go
All the
back
enterprise
here.
funds? Okay.
It's dollar to dollar, all their enterprise funds. If you look at the bottom half of this, it kind of shows you by fund where that improvement came. So liquor went up by about $290,000, but that's after you transferred almost $200,000 to the general fund to support your general fund budget out of that fund.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm glad we're on this slide. Let's talk a little bit about the licensing fund. Is that motor vehicle licensing?
Correct.
So in the past, it's always been in the positive. Could we talk a little bit about why we're in the negative?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, and I think, Bill, maybe this is a good way to describe the difference of what we're reporting when we say the net position, what that factors into its balance, maybe. That would be helpful.
Sure. So your net position essentially in this case is the net of all assets and liabilities, including any long-term capital assets, long-term debt, employee benefits that are outstanding. So you did, the financial position of that fund did improve by about $65,000. But I think your licensing fund, like a lot of licensing funds across the state, kind of took a big hit during COVID. And also there was, I don't remember how many years ago, where the state changed the computer system and there was all kinds of overtime and expense because they did a software upgrade, quotes, and then had to redo that again. Was it 1 year later or 2 years later? So there was a lot of cost and a lot of lost business during COVID. So I think that's where that accumulation of a deficit net position came from. You're working your way out of that still.
Right, but on an operating basis, I would clarify, like the revenues we take in each year compared to the expenses we have out, we are still operating positively.
Perfect. Not applicable to this, but it just, thought about this. I know that now with the vending machines, deputy registrars are entitled to some fee. At some point, or especially as we get into budget season, can we get some numbers in terms of how are we doing? How have we been impacted by that? Are the fees we're collecting from the state proportionate to what we would have expected?
Yeah, happy to provide that update.
That'd be great. Thank you. And then also the one miss. I mean, I know we have thousands of transactions, and so I want to put that in perspective before we go down this road. Can we talk a little bit about, because I think it's important for the public to understand, and you did a very good job of explaining this, that according to Minnesota law, we have to pay our vendors for goods or services within 35 days. We missed the mark on one of the items that was pulled for the audit. Can we talk a little bit about what happened there and what we're doing going forward to ensure that we don't have that happen again?
Yeah, happy to do that, Madam Mayor and council members. So this particular invoice that wasn't paid within 35 days originated for work that was completed down at the Muni building, and it wasn't turned in, I think, for like more than 20 days up to City Hall to then go through approval to get the city manager's authorization to pay it. So there was just a delay in it being held at one building and not turned into finance to process. We're constantly working to try and get all vendors to submit invoices, not to specific departments, but to submit them directly to our finance department. So that way we've got them, we can keep track that they're being paid on time. So that's just something we're continuing to reiterate with our staff of tell the vendors you work with that all invoices go to finance, not just to your department, because then we're shuffling paper around or keeping track of what's been turned in or not turned in.
Or emailed versus paper.
Right.
Right. And do they go to a general email box when
Yeah,
they
we
do
have
get in?
we have a finance@wayzata.org email that is just dedicated for invoices.
Perfect. Okay. Well, it is important to remember that our one individual, Kathy, handles all of those. The filing, I mean, it's not just getting it and writing a check. It's making sure the approvals occur and getting them entered into the system, coded properly, checks printed, or electronic fund transfers, or however we're, depending on the vendor. So to have one item that happens like that, I appreciate certainly all the hard work through the year. So, thank you. All right, well, how about, if there are no further questions, thank you very much for all your hard work, your staff's hard work. I know it's a big undertaking for everybody, but it's a necessary part of what we're obligated to do. So with that, would someone care to make a motion to accept the city's 2023 audited financial reports?
Madam Mayor, I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Councilmember Plekish. Is there a second?
Second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion passes. Thank you very much. We'll see you next year.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, under new business, is to consider approval of the first reading of ordinance 838, City Code Amendments to Chapter 936, Tree Preservation. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Our city forester and certified arborist, Bennett Myron's going to handle this item.
Madam Mayor, Council, thank you for having me here tonight. So, I'm going to talk about our tree preservation ordinance. I will give a brief history of how we got here, a little bit of background of how it's been functioning, and how effective it's been since the big changes were made about 1.5 years ago. And then ultimately, I'll explain some of the zoning text amendments that are being proposed. So in October of 2022, the TPO in its current form generally was adopted. So we've been using this chapter for about 1.5 years now. And you'll see these 6 items here. These are the goals and intentions that the chapter describes in section 1. You'll notice that pretty much all of these 6 items address the impacts that development has on our urban forest. And I wanted to really highlight this because although we've only had the TPO in its current form for about 1.5 years, you're well aware of the amount of development interest and activity in Wayzata. So in that relatively short amount of time, this chapter has been well exercised, and we've learned a lot about how it functions. How applicable is it? How effective is it? And so that's what is informing the text amendments that we'll get into after we discuss a little bit more about the impacts that it's had so far. So 108 removal plans have been permitted. So this can be anything from a single dead tree in a backyard to a large-scale development project where there are lots of tree impacts and everything in between. This chapter has been applied to all of those different proposals that are submitted. And with each of those review processes, there is a conversation with the applicant in regards to, well, depending on the project, the need for tree removal, the condition of the trees that they're describing, preservation techniques, all sorts of things. And oftentimes in those conversations, we are able to together preserve trees that were proposed for removal. And that's by identifying alternative ways to preserve them. It's by providing some education about the true condition of the tree in regards to health and vigor, hazardous structure of a tree, understanding that. So this is not something that we're measuring, but I see it regularly, and that is I think a really significant benefit that this chapter has provided that I personally wasn't expecting. So I thought that was worth mentioning for sure. So almost 5,000 inches have been planted, which were required by the city based on the removals that were permitted. So you probably remember that the removals and the replacement, those formulas that we have in this chapter are all based on the diameter inches of the trunks of these trees. So a tree is removed, what's the size of that trunk? That's really that's what we're measuring. And various formulas are applied depending on the project, depending on the property, depending on the amount of trees that are preserved. And then what we end up with is a required amount of inches that are to be installed on that property. So these 5,000 inches have been installed since the TPO was implemented, which is that translates to about 2,500 trees. And what I think is really important about this number is that all of these inches, all of these trees are secured and essentially guaranteed for proper establishment in our forest. So a financial surety is submitted to the city, which is only released once these trees are established over a 3-year period. Really important piece of that. Also, the replacement canopy is by definition more diverse than our existing established canopy. So when there's a required tree replacement connected to a project, we require that no more than 20% of any one tree genus represents that replacement plan. It's extremely important because we have slowly learned, slower than we'd like, we've learned that invasive pests and pathogens have an appetite for a particular kind of tree, whether that's elm trees with Dutch elm disease, ash trees with emerald ash borer, oak wilt, so on and so forth. There really aren't any that don't discriminate. So without knowing what the next problem is going to be, we can still anticipate it. We can still diversify our forest as best we can and know that our losses are mitigated by us doing that. Because ultimately, if any species is overrepresented in a forest, transmissibility is extreme and the impacts are catastrophic in some cases, like elm trees in the downtown area back in the 70s. This is more closely related to the tree removal permitting process specifically. So the city, in accordance with this chapter, we require that a tree removal permit is obtained for any tree that is 6 inches or greater in trunk diameter. And that's regardless of condition. So it could be dead, dying, diseased. We still require a permit. We don't collect a fee on those, which is really important because we don't want to slow people down if they're taking down a tree that really shouldn't be there. But what's really important is that we're getting the information because we, as an organization, only have direct management of about 10% of our community's forest. That's the public property forest. The other 90% is on private property. So we don't have a real good sense of what is stressing those trees out because we're not working with them. But through this permitting process, we're able to see what is stressing them out, what is sometimes killing them, and as a result, we're able to respond much sooner than we otherwise could. Just in the last year, we were able to identify that on the east side of town, there's a lot of, some of you might know, there's a lot of really mature oak trees, hundreds of years old, mostly bur oak and some red oak. After 3 years of drought, they were super stressed. They got a native fungus called bur oak blight. It weakened them even further. They were attacked by two-line chestnut borer, which started killing these trees. So we caught this early, and in response, we were able to treat some of our public trees that were over on that side of town to protect them from this problem, and also restructure our contract with Rainbow Tree Care to provide a discounted rate for oak protection, similar to what they had already offered for ash trees. So as a result, we have more residents that are protecting those same trees. So as far as the amendment process goes, we had that workshop on April 9th where we touched on a lot of different tree issues, mostly the TPO and its impacts on the canopy, of course, but also city budgets, staffing, plan review, all sorts of things, internal stuff. The public's response, we talked about quite a bit. I said then and still think that it's generally positive. to the goals of the TPO. It's nuanced, though. It depends on, with developers especially, there's kind of a learning curve. There's different expectations with site design, with, sometimes they have to bring in specialists who can prepare a more detailed tree preservation plan. But as time has gone on, I think everybody's gotten to be more comfortable with these standards, and it's becoming more streamlined, which is encouraging. And ultimately, we talked about areas for improvement and some proposed language for text amendments. On May 6th, the Planning Commission was presented with this same material, and they ultimately voted unanimously to recommend approval. So what are the amendments that we're talking about here? There are a variety of, I would say, clarifying edits or changes that remove some discretion, add some objectivity. But then there are others that do affect the functionality of the chapter. And the way I see it, I think there's 6 of those, and that's what I'll touch on now. Number 1 would be to standardize the city's interpretation of tree hazards. This is really important for a few reasons, but the one that stands out to me is, so when a tree plan is submitted that includes an inventory for a development project, the trees are listed according to their size, according to their species, location, and condition. One of the conditions that would disqualify a tree from replacement requirement is if it's hazardous. Well, we currently don't have a definition of what that is. So we don't, if there's a questionable condition claim, we don't have a benchmark that we can work off of to dispute that. And there are industry standard, very, very objective ways to identify tree risk. And that's what we've tried to capture in this particular amendment. Number 2 would be to codify the use of tree mitigation agreements. This is something that we're doing already. Basically, it's a contract between the applicant and the city, which describes the nature of the payment, whether that's a fee in lieu of planting or an escrow, which is backing replacement. It describes the timeline for release, what those expectations are, acknowledgements, signatures, dates, all of that fun stuff. We started doing that about a year ago at the direction of our senior accountant, and that has been a great addition to the system, I think. Number 3 is to revise the heritage tree definition to better reflect relative species value. This is a bit loaded, I think, but basically right now we have 2 groups of trees that we look at when we are trying to determine what replacement requirements might be for a project. We have rapid growth trees and we have standard growth trees. Those 2 categories cross thresholds at different sizes. So a rapid growth tree becomes significant when it is 12 inches in diameter, and then heritage when it's 30 inches in diameter currently. A standard growth tree crosses that threshold for significance at 6 inches, and then heritage at 25 inches. What's proposed here is to eliminate the threshold for rapid growth trees for heritage classification. So starting at 12 inches, those rapid growth trees will remain significant, but they will never cross a threshold which would where they would be considered heritage. It's important because so those rapid growth species, those are things like willow, cottonwood, silver maple. These are extremely fast-growing trees that have a relatively short life. So by the time they get to be 30 inches in diameter, even a good example is silver maple. We see those probably most often. A 30-inch silver maple, generally speaking, in good condition, we could expect another 20 to 60 years life expectancy for a heritage tree. On the flip side, something like one of those bur oaks in Holdridge, a 25-inch bur oak, which would also be considered heritage, we could expect another 50 to 350 years of life. So while those two trees currently provide the same environmental benefits, give or take, the net value of those trees in terms of the goals that we were trying to realize in this chapter, they're vastly different, just because of the amount of time that they're contributing those things that we're trying to harvest. So the rapid growth trees would still require replacement throughout their life, depending on their condition, but it would be 1 for 1 inch rather than 2 to 1 inch, as they currently do when they become heritage. So it's a little bit complicated, I know, but I think it's a distinction that is worth making. Number 4 would be to allow for site-specific heritage tree preservation. Basically, what this means is, depending on the site, depending on the soil type, depending on a lot of different things, this would allow the applicant to propose an alternative way to preserve a tree that would otherwise be unpreservable with standard methods. So there are lots of specialized ways that most of them are quite expensive, so it's not something we would require. But if an applicant is willing to go the extra mile and spend the extra money to preserve a big, valuable tree, we don't want to dissuade them from doing that. In some cases, if it is especially high risk, we would probably collect an escrow on that to ensure the viability of that preservation effort, but provide some flexibility where I think it is appropriate. Number 5 would be to require best planting practices for mandatory tree replacement. This is pretty simple. So when there is required replacement, we require a plan for replacement. Basically, it's a landscape plan that demonstrates a number of things, including diversity, placement, nuances of the site, lots of stuff like that. But really, we should be requiring best practices to be observed during planting, because there are a lot of things that contribute to a tree's viability long-term that happen when the tree is planted. So we need to be mindful of that and require that it's done properly. Finally, number 6 would be to set a due date for required tree replacement. So right now, basically the chapter states that in situations where the approved plan is not fulfilled to completion, the city can use whatever escrow remains to correct or complete that work, which is great if it's viable or feasible to do that. In some cases, we've learned that the approved plan doesn't work out. There's changes in ownership, there's changes in the nature of the site, whatever the case may be. Basically, this would set a clock that begins at the project's completion. Say it's a new home that's constructed. When they receive their certificate of occupancy, that clock begins. And if in that 24 months, the approved plan hasn't been completed, there's been no communication with the city, then we would be able to retain that escrow as a fee in lieu of planting, which we could then spend on various other tree preservation and planting efforts throughout the city. So the Planning Commission and staff recommend approval of the first reading of Ordinance 838, City Code amendments to Chapter 936, tree preservation. And if approved, the second reading of this ordinance would be scheduled for June 4th. And with that, I would be happy to take whatever questions you might have about what I've covered in the presentation or any of the edits that I didn't touch on that are included in the packet.
Wonderful, thank you, Mr. Myron. Council's questions at this point? Well, yes, Councilmember McDonald.
It's more of a curiosity than a real question. I think this was all really comprehensive, and I'm glad you've had a year and a half to review how this works with the community. But I'm curious what the site-specific heritage tree preservation.
Yeah.
I'd love an example, because I'm just curious.
That's a great question. Thank you. So it really does depend on the site, but some of the more common examples would include decompaction or aeration of the soil, depending on its type. So around here, we have a lot of clay. And most of the time, if a tree experiences stress as a result of construction activity, it's because that soil has been compacted to the point where the roots can't access adequate oxygen. With clay, that's a serious problem because when it compresses, it doesn't just bounce back. It requires something. In nature, that would be a pioneer species coming in and aerating the soil with its roots. That doesn't happen on a developed property. So to reverse that problem, you would have to go in there with compressed air, usually, and they would basically punch holes into the soil in columns and then insert organic matter that could then revitalize that tree, or better yet, you would get there before the tree was able to respond to that stress. That's probably the most common example, and actually the city just received an air spade tool, which is what does that, through a grant from Hennepin County, which we're pretty excited to play around with. So that'll be fun.
Make sure you take video.
We will.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's fascinating. I did not know that was even possible. I grew up out east where there's a ton of clay. I mean, like really, really thick clay. I kept thinking, but there are lots of trees. But you explained it very well.
Yeah, and certainly there are trees that thrive in that as long as oxygen is adequate. It's interesting, though, if you're in the sand plains, for example, they don't have the same problems we do. They have other problems, but when they experience compaction in their soils, it's just a matter of time before oxygen levels kind of come back to normal because their soils they have so much pore space.
Yeah.
It's interesting, I think.
It is amazing. Every time you come to speak with us, we learn something new from you. So, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Other questions? Kathy?
I have a couple questions and comments. I think it's fascinating that we had 108 permits, but I'm just curious in the future years to continue to have a tally. I think that was part of the objective of this. And so, I mean, that's a large number.
It is, yes.
Wow. I was kind of surprised that it was that many. So I'm curious to see where we end up in the following years as well. I've heard your name mentioned quite a bit out there in the community with much respect.
That was my
so-
next question.
Mine too.
Should I have waited a little longer to tell you? I should have waited longer. And that the people are very happy to see you out there, see you interacting on the job sites, giving residents information about their trees, some that they don't like to hear, but at least it's information. And so that's been really something positive I've heard out there. So another thing that would be something I think that is an ongoing thing probably for you is tree protection and how we continue to really enforce that and communicate to developers the need to have that and respect that and not to cross those boundaries. You probably know which site I'm talking about. And again, I appreciate that you responded very quickly to that situation. So I think these are all lessons of learning, and through this and many other ones that you've probably learned, I think the tree preservation plan is only going to get better and better. So thank you for all your hard work out there.
Thank you.
Excellent. Councilmember Parkhill, anything? Yeah, Councilmember Pleckish.
Yeah, I'm really happy to see this finally coming to conclusion. We've been wrestling with this for as long as I've been on the council, trying to come up with something that makes sense because it is important to the community. My question really is, I'm curious, in your dealings now with the community, what do you feel has been their reaction generally?
I would say generally positive, although I think it's hard for me personally to gauge because most of the people that I'm interacting with, there's a reason, for it. I try to get out there as much as I can. We have various events where I try to, answer questions and stuff like that, which is great because if they ask me a question about their tree, I'm happy to help, and I'll usually ask them, what do you think about what we're doing? And that, in those conversations, I would say the feedback is generally positive, and which is great. But at the same time, if there's room for improvement, I think we should pursue that, and that's why we're here. So,
All right, thank you.
Well, I don't have any questions per se. Mostly just observations and comments. As Councilmember Pleckish just noted, this is something on the council for 10 years. We've been struggling with it for 10 years. This is now version 2. But was it about 15, 18 months ago that we passed this? Somewhere in
October of 22.
Okay. So, at that time, and it wasn't that previous councils weren't interested in passing an ordinance, a tree preservation ordinance, but there were so many nuances and so many intricacies, and we wanted to capture everything, in a basket without overly impacting folks. And, I am a true believer in things are meant to happen in a particular way. We may not see it in the moment. And we really struggled, and we took things and we put this on the shelf for a while. And thanks to Councilmember Everson for bringing it forward again with a huge, I think, cautionary tale for me. I was like, we've tried, we haven't gotten there yet, but here we are. And so, I think definitely it also takes the right people to bring forward initiatives, especially initiatives like this. And it's people who are committed and dedicated and passionate about a topic. And I'm just so very grateful that you are that person in a different capacity at the time when we passed this. But the city was committed, and we committed, we struggle all the time. We had conversations recently, just a couple hours ago, about budgets and money. And we made a commitment. We made a commitment that this was important to our community. And then that it was also important to have the right individual conduct the enforcement and also the education, right? Because that's a very important piece as well. And invest in you, and because we felt you were the right person, and all the pieces came together so very well. And so I'm very appreciative of that. I couldn't think of a better representative out there to represent not only the city and our values, but trees. And so, I joke all the time. I'm like, Bennett, our tree guy, because you are quintessential. I know you have a fancier title than that, our arborist, but you'll always be our tree guy. So thank you for everything you've done here.
Well, thank you, Mayor. That's very kind.
Yeah. All right. If there was anything, before we get to any motions, if there was anything that you could change, let's put the ordinances aside, the enforcement piece, that's a part certainly of your job description. There was anything that you could do, you have your crystal ball, that you could say, this is in my capacity as the city's arborist, and with your passion, what would you take on? What would you do that you think would move the needle even further in our community?
Yeah, that's a great question. A couple months ago, I would have said I wish it would rain. And it has.
Stop right?
So that's wonderful.
Yes.
It's a step in the right direction. Aside from that, I would really love it if people were more aware of the idea that all these trees are connected, literally connected. And what you do on your property affects your neighbor's trees or trees on the other side of town, when we're talking about pests and stuff like that. It really is, it's a massive resource. If you consider it a resource, as I do, it's probably our largest resource, and it's very interconnected. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind, obviously when you're making decisions like these, but even on an individual level, where you're deciding, what contractor I'm going to use to trim my tree. Do I need to trim my tree? Because everything is trees are, they operate slowly, but at the same time, they respond to even the smallest changes in their environment. So I'm glad that people are becoming more sensitive to that, and I hope that continues.
I think it's interesting. I mean, we all kind of somewhat understand the maintenance we need to do on our homes, the schedule, the cadence that each of the items, when you wash your windows, replace your roof, paint. But I have to tell you, I certainly don't know the maintenance schedule for trees and shrubs and bushes, and maybe that's something that we could help educate folks on, that they should get pruned or trimmed every so often or something. And what about, do you work with the schools at all in terms of teaching kids? They're certainly the biggest sponges, right?
Yeah.
And all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Not in a school setting. We've had a few different students that have reached out to the city, and they're interested in. Usually, it's kind of natural resources broadly, and they find my email, and I hear from them, and we, sometimes it's they want to do an interview or a report or something like that, and I love doing that. I love to see kids being excited about stuff like this, because the way I see it. Forestry, but actually more broadly, natural resources will become more and more important, or it'll be recognized more and more as for being as important as it is. So we need people that are passionate and interested, and that really care about that sort of stuff. So. Yeah, I would love to spend more time doing stuff like that, for sure.
I think you would be well-suited to do that, and the schools would be very fortunate to have you come in for a classroom session. I know you're terribly busy. I'm not going to throw more at you. Either that or consider writing a really fun, kids book about trees. And
Absolutely.
we'll find a local artist or something. I think you'd be great at. Okay, I'm done throwing things at you. But I would say the idea of the diversification of the trees also, you and I have talked about the plague up in northern Minnesota. Mm-hmm. With the balsam and the spruce budworm. And again, it sometimes takes generations to get to where we are, but the logging that allowed all the balsam to kind of overtake the forests, and now there are swaths of, huge tracts of land where every balsam is annihilated from this pest, and it's going to take I mean, hundreds of years to get back to where it needs to be, and the fire danger and all of those things that go along with that. So thank you for, bringing this to the forefront and with regard to the importance of that.
Thank you.
All right, very good. So we will have assuming this passes, we will have a second reading of this at the following meeting, I believe I heard, or June 4th. So at this point, what we need is a motion to approve the first reading of ordinance 838, city code amendments related to tree preservation. I believe that's chapter 936.
So moved.
Thank you. And a second? Kathy, why don't you do the honors?
Second.
All right, thank you.
shall
Any
let
further
you do that.
discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The motion passes.
Thank you, council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You need a little section of the portal for trees.
I know.
I'd love nothing more.
Myron's section.
Oh, well, like when's the proper time to prune?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Love it.
All right, city manager. We'll have you coordinate with Liv on, we'll need it. Liv's great at coming up with a catchy little section. A little,
Probably already got one after.
I know.
Tree news.
Tree
Me-
news.
Meetings with Myron.
We'll have to tie in
Best
the,
of
the
Bennett.
Lorax in some way.
Please, yes.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we have one more item under new business, and that is another ordinance reading. That is 837 of City Code Amendments to Chapter 930, the keeping of chickens. City manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As you mentioned, Bennett's been pivotal in our tree preservation ordinance. He had a lot of assistance, especially at the front end of it, from our Parks and Environment planner, Keyser, and Nick is here to walk through this ordinance, and he's been pivotal in getting this interesting topic to a place where I think we can actually take action and move forward. So props to Mr. Keyser, and he's going to walk us through this item.
That's right. That's a long title. Pep Keyser.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
We're not
thank
going to
you.
forget that one. You know that.
Oh, I know
I
you
won't let
won't.
people forget.
Well, thank
It's
you.
all in good fun because it's well-deserved title.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. And so I get the finale here tonight to talk about chickens. As it was noted, I'm going to talk about the first reading of Ordinance 837, which is the City Code amendments to Chapter 930, which is actually the animal section of code, but it's the proposed text amendments to allow for the keeping of chickens. So I'll first go over some background as to how we got to this point, some previous discussions, then go over the proposed amendments themselves, and then wrap it up with some of the planning commission discussion and next steps. So to start, currently chickens are not allowed within the city of Wayzata without a conditional use permit. Now, we're not aware of anybody who has a CUP to keep chickens. We haven't had any interest from any residents to go through that process to keep chickens.
But it's a very pricey process
Correct.
and
Yep.
lengthy. Yep.
It could be a couple $1,000s, and it takes 3 to 6 months to complete that type of process, and there's no guarantee that you would get that CUP. In 2021, so previously, there was similar text amendments that were proposed that went to the Planning Commission, the City Council. Ultimately, those text amendments were not approved. At that time, there were some more urgent priorities that delayed the item. There's more questions about community interest at that time, if this is something that the community actually wanted. But since then, we've got a little bit more interest from the community, more council priority towards revisiting these proposed amendments to see if we can come to and approve code amendments. So just touching on some of the previous discussions, more recent previous discussions, first with the city council workshop, obviously the council discussed a variety of options ranging from allowing chickens to not allowing chickens, and everywhere kind of in between of more stringent to less stringent requirements for those text amendments. Council at that time directed staff to propose one of those options that were brought forward, and really again focusing on simplicity when moving this forward while still preserving the community's character, so finding that balance again between those two. The Energy Environment Committee reviewed the similar options that the council reviewed at their workshop, and their discussion or their kind of recommendation was to, similar to the council discussion, was to keep the restrictions as simple as possible, but also keep it as accessible to all residents as possible, to have everyone have this kind of opportunity to have chickens on the property. They also noted or focused on the benefits that chickens could have of being more sustainable and the educational opportunities that come along with that. So now I'll go over some of the proposed changes here. And again, what we proposed text amendments really brought forward in reviewing the previous discussions, the more recent, the past discussions of 2021 and more recent discussions that we had with council and the E&E committee, as well as looking at other neighboring communities and how they regulate or allow chickens in their communities. So proposed changes here. First, overall, the proposed text amendments allow chickens on any single-family residential property in Wayzata. With that, we would require a permit application, most likely online permit application, which would involve a site plan, which staff would review to make sure all the restrictions are met that we'll go over here in a second. And then alongside that, there would be some educational materials that would be attached to that permit application for those applicants to review. One example we noted here was that the U of M has a good document and good resources for kind of more urban or backyard chicken keeping. We would allow a proposed maximum of 4 hens and no roosters. Those chickens must be maintained in a chicken coop or a run. We also added language in there that they can kind of roam around the rear yard if that rear yard is fenced in. Chicken coops have a maximum square feet of 50 square feet. Runs have a maximum of 100 square feet. We upped that a little bit since the council workshop discussion. We note that all accessory structure setbacks must be met, and that structure setback is different for each zoning district. And I'll touch on that in a second with the planning commission discussion as well, but just note that there. And then just generally, a chicken coop and run, it needs to be maintained in a healthy and sanitary condition, and that chickens can only be kept for personal use, no commercial uses. So the planning commission reviewed the same exact text, city code text amendments at their May 6th meeting, and the planning commission ultimately recommended approval of these text amendments, but they did have kind of subject to 4 conditions. And these conditions, they really wanted council to discuss a little bit more, make aware of potential amendments to the proposed amendments that are before you tonight. So the first one being including a minimum lot size requirement. Now, this is something that we talked about and proposed back in 2021 as well. Now, I did add here, ultimately, that staff recommends not including this lot size minimum. There was significant discussion back in 2021. There's a lot of questions of where that number should be for that lot size minimum, who should be allowed to have chickens and who should not. But ultimately, we kind of recommend to not have this requirement to allow this opportunity for all residents. And the planning commission put this condition in here, really noting that they wanted to start with larger lots, see how it went, to slowly transition to allowing chickens on smaller lots if it goes well. The second condition here would be to increase the setback requirement for the chicken coop and chicken run. As I noted before, in the current code, we have that they must follow the accessory structure setback requirements for the zoning district. Now, Some of those zoning districts, like in the R3A zoning district, the central core neighborhoods, the smaller properties, that setback can be as low as 5 feet. And so it seemed to be a pretty easy fix if we just up that to a simple 10-foot setback for all properties. So if we went with this condition, staff would recommend a 10-foot setback for all the chicken coops and chicken runs, and that would still keep the enforcement simple, keep the review simple with that consistent 10-foot setback number. The third one being to look at potentially increasing the fence height for allowing chickens to roam in the rear yard. Now, surrounding communities have a similar kind of code language with allowing chickens. A lot of them actually do not have a fence height requirement in our, and actually I didn't see any. In our proposed code, we actually list a 4-foot height requirement. Now the Planning Commission had the thought to increase that to like a 6-foot height requirement just for that extra precaution. But again, I haven't seen any other communities that have any kind of fence height requirement. Essentially, they just note that they need to be contained within that rear yard. And I'll note I did talk to a few other communities directly since the Planning Commission discussion, and none of them noted having really any significant issues with chickens getting out of properties if they are fenced in. The fourth one here, adding a renewal process for the permitting process. Again, the Planning Commission thought that this would add a little bit more options for review of the chicken coops, chicken runs, and the overall chicken keeping process for the properties. If there are different touch points with the applicant or the property owner. Staff ultimately recommends if we do go this route, we could do a 2-year renewal process. Other communities do this as well, to essentially touch base with the resident or the property owner and say we would need a renewal, have them go through a renewal process to keep their chickens. I did talk with, I'll go back quick. I did talk with communities again about this note as well. And a lot of them noted that some of them did have the renewal process, and they noted that through the renewal process, it didn't really help with any kind of enforcement or different issues that came up. A lot of the issues that they have, and I'll say that they noted they really don't have any issues. It'd be maybe 2 calls or something a year is what some of them noted, 2 to 3. They noted that mainly the calls that they get are people that don't have a permit in the first place. So the permitting process kind of addresses a lot of the issues at the front end, and the renewal process adds a little bit more administrative time and more process and more work for the applicant and the resident as well. So I just wanted to note that there. So overall, the recommendation from the E&E committee and staff is recommending approval of first reading of ordinance 837 as proposed or with any other conditions or proposed amendments. And ultimately, the Planning Commission did recommend approval of the text amendments with those 4 conditions noted. They voted at it was approved on a 4-2 vote. The next steps would be having the second reading of ordinance 837 at the next council meeting on June 4th. And then staff would also work to start creating that permit application and permitting process. We did also receive 1 public comment that was attached to the council packet for review, which was generally in support of text amendments to allow chickens. So with that, I'll bring it back to Madam Mayor and Council for any questions.
We're just oogling over the little baby chicks.
I'll leave that on there
So
for
darn
you.
cute. Okay. And as someone who's been wanting to keep chickens for years, but I don't live in a place where I can do that, it makes me really want baby chicks. All right, I digress. Questions of staff? Anybody?
I've got one question. I've gone through all the materials, but just to ask the question publicly, how many communities immediately surrounding us actually have chicken ordinances?
Yeah, Councilmember Pleckish, there's a good number. It was pretty rare when I was looking to see communities not allow chickens. But I would say a majority of our neighboring communities allow chickens to some extent.
All right. And in your discussions with these other communities, has there been any pushback or any warning about doing this?
No, Councilmember Pleckish, and kind of like I noted, they all noted the same thing, that they don't receive many complaints or issues from any neighbors or anything. Really, the main thing that I noted was that if somebody doesn't have a chicken permit, there's some issues with that. But other than that, if they have a permit and follow the restrictions, there wasn't really any complaints.
I will note that whoever's owning these chickens that you have in front of us, they're out of compliance by one chicken.
Good note.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Okay, other questions?
Go ahead.
I'd like to just get into the recommendations from Planning Commission, if that's okay.
Let's do that. Let's get to questions, because that might,
You have a question?
No
drive
question.
more. Oh, well, there you go. Okay, let's get to the recommendations.
Jump in.
Jump in.
Okay, I'm just going to go through the way that you've got them listed in our packet. I'm okay not having a minimum lot size. I think that it should be open to everybody. I think that people will choose to have them probably on the smaller lots. I could be 100% wrong. I also agree with that we should increase the setback. I know you said 10 feet. I'm actually leaning a little bit towards 20, and my rationale for that is most of the new developments, the homes have a 10-foot setback. So I think pushing the chicken coop a little further into the yard versus having it line up with the house is just probably something more visually attractive for a neighbor. I'm okay not increasing the fence height. I think most people will be watching their chickens. If they really want to escape and jump over the 4-foot fence, maybe he wants to be let go. I do believe that we should have a renewal every 2 years. I don't think that we're going to have that many, honestly. So from an administrative standpoint, I don't think it's going to be a ton of work. But I think it's an opportunity to have and engage in conversations with the residents that are keeping chickens. So it's a chance for us to gather information and also talk to someone if there's been complaints. And so I think a one-time application in the long run is probably not a good decision. So I would support a reapplication every 2 years.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kathy. Others? Yeah? Councilmember Parkhill?
I think we've vetted and discussed, and now we need to discover. I mean, we've really spent, as long as I've been on Planning Commission, I think, and council, I think this has come up for a long time, and I think we give it a try. I don't have any issue with it at all. I think one comment would be, some people put a lot of money into these little coops and the runs, and for item 12 on 315 requires it to be revoked. Or excuse me, the coops be, a permit holder or property owner must remove the chicken coop and chicken run if permit is revoked or expires, or if there's no longer chickens on the property. I just think we don't have them remove other things on their property if they're no longer using it, and they're kind of expensive. Maybe they want to get that permit again, or maybe they're going on vacation for 3 months, and so they've had some chicken pot pie, and now they'll get them again next, 3 months later. So, I don't think that, I wouldn't agree with number 12. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's overreach, and, if it's unsightly or something, then it can be discussed with the owner. So anyway, I'm excited about it. Why not? Let's give it a try. I know we're not allowed to use commercial use for this, but if some little girl wants to sell a dozen eggs for $3 or something and has a little sign in her front yard, I hope we treat it like a Kool-Aid stand, and not enforce the the commercial aspect of that. So.
I see nothing, say nothing. Oh, do you have any particular feelings with regard to the 4 items that the planning commission laid out? Were you okay with staff's
I was all okay
recommendation?
with all 4 of them, yes. And, you know, I just concerned that 20 feet might be too much for the smaller lots.
Okay. I'm just taking notes. And then, was staff opposed to the renewal, okay with the renewal? You guys can make it work either way.
Yeah, Madam Mayor and
Not a huge
Councilmember
sticking-
Iverson's been right, yeah, I don't think it'll be much administrative time. And I'll note, the one that did note that was a larger city, much larger city. So that would probably be the reason for
Okay,
administrative time.
all right. All right, Councilmember Pleckish, what are your thoughts? I think I know, but
Yeah. Well, for one, I'm excited it's finally here. I've been pushing this for how many years?
a lot.
I think for almost all my time on the council, which has been about 8 years. So I also made some notes here in order of the considerations from Planning Commission. I did watch that meeting, and I read all their notes, so I'm pretty familiar with it. With regard to minimum lot size, I think that's just arbitrary. We initially were talking about, I think it was like a 40,000 square foot minimum lot size, and in my interaction with the community, it's the smaller homes that actually want this rather than the larger estate homes, so I don't think we're going to see that. So I wouldn't be in favor of establishing a minimum lot size. As long as it's a single-family residence, they should be allowed to do this. In terms of increasing the setback, I would be opposed to that as well. I think the owners of the property will probably know best where to locate this thing, and I don't think there's going to be many people that actually go right up to the edge anyway. Anything we do about increasing the setback is arbitrary. Setbacks were established for a reason right now with any accessory structure, so I don't see any reason why we should increase it. I really don't think that's going to be a problem. As far as increasing fence height, that also would be not only arbitrary, but no other community is requiring it. And although I'm not a chicken expert, but in my casual observation of chickens, they don't fly. I know they can, but they don't. And when they do, it's usually because they're being chased by something, a fox, a wolf, or dog, or something. They're not trying to escape and go into the next yard. So I don't see any reason why we should consider that too. And again, no other community is requiring that. And with regard to the renewal process, I guess I'm okay with that. If you guys are okay with that, I don't think we really need to do that. I think, frankly, people who want to maintain chickens are probably going to naturally fall off over a period of time. I think it's just an administrative thing that we might implement, but not really have a need for it. But because this is brand new in the community, and we are still a bit of in the experimental mode, at least for Wayzata, I'd be okay with putting a renewal time on there. But again, I don't think we really need it. Again, I'm very excited to see this here.
Councilmember
You can
McDonald.
clap.
I'm
You
gonna
will.
clap. I really don't even have to go through it. That's exactly how I feel about all those points. Ditto, Councilmember Pleckish.
No, you can clap.
You know, yeah.
So I'm excited too. And at first I was a little wishy-washy about that setback, but then I started to think, what if that kept someone from being able to do it? Like if there wasn't enough room in their yard and this, anyways, I thought there would be an unintended consequence that would hurt someone who wanted chickens. So yeah, I support this kind of as written, but if the 2-year renewal, feels like a warm blanket of security, then I'm fine with that too. So, thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Councilmember Iverson?
I just want to make a comment regarding the setback. The way that it's written, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, if we follow the setbacks that we allow for ADUs, chicken coops could be put at 5 feet on someone's property. I think that's just too close. I mean, I know I pushed it at 20. I think 10 would be more reasonable. I think 5 feet from on someone's property line is just too close to a neighbor.
Would you be comfortable, would you be okay with the 10?
I'd be
as
okay with the
recommended?
10. Yep,
Okay.
yep. But I think 5 is just, I think it's way too close.
Okay.
And Madam Mayor and Council, one point of clarification too. So the 5-foot setback is the lowest one. That would be in like the R3A zoning districts. Pretty much all the other zoning districts are at 10 and above. So it's really just for the smaller central core lots that 5 feet, but I assume that's one of the most concerned as well.
Yes.
Yep.
So I guess I'd ask the rest of my council members as they think about this, or they'd be more comfortable revising it to 5 or 10, because I think that's what planning commission was concerned about, was the 5 foot.
Right, the planning commission recommended 10 feet.
Yep.
You were in favor of 20,
I'll come down to
But-
10.
10. All right, and I think everybody else was comfortable with 10 feet, or the 5.
I was comfortable with 5. I'm just
Right.
trying to picture my own, I live in one of those smaller lots, under 10,000 square feet, and I'm just thinking, that doesn't leave a whole lot of room. In my neighbor's backyards, there's a lot of trees and fences, and it's not like it's just gonna be, so it's not a deal breaker for me, but I feel more comfortable just giving people the freedom to have chickens.
Okay.
And I'm along the same lines of thinking. The setbacks are varied depending on the type of property, and they were set with logical reasons is why they were where they are. I say you just let it be up to the resident. And if the resident feels like 5 feet is too close to a property line, I think they will make that adjustment. But I don't think we should arbitrarily just cut them back. I mean, it's just a number. So I'd like to just keep it right at 5, or keep it at the normal setback requirements, which could be as low as 5, but most of them are higher than that.
Could we talk just briefly, name 3 different types of ADUs?
And I wouldn't necessarily say ADU, I would say accessory structure.
Accessory
So-
structure, yes,
yeah.
thank
So
you.
that could be, a detached garage, a shed, I don't know, gazebo. You could have those sorts of things that are just off of the principal structure, usually in your rear yard.
Yep.
If you have like a guest house in some of the larger lots, that could be another example.
Okay. So structure's bigger than the maximum of what we're talking about here for a chicken coop that's allowed at 5 feet. I mean, if somebody put in a chicken coop, which is where I'm leaning, right? We passed zoning that allowed in certain areas to have a setback of 5 feet for these accessory structures. And what we're talking about here, significantly smaller. So I'm tending to lean towards being okay with it, since, we approved a garage.
Yeah, and I
At 5
didn't
feet.
agree to 5 foot setbacks. I asked that got changed, but one voice. And part of that is because I also live in my lot is narrow as well. And the adjacent property comes 10 feet up to my house. So I can't imagine having a structure. Now I have 5 feet between my house and that house. It's so tight. There's no sunlight. There's nothing that comes through. There's no plants that can get grown. There's no vegetation at all because there's not enough setback between the 2 houses. So my concern is we continue to encroach and make our lots smaller and smaller. And I don't agree with that, especially on these smaller lots. We need more open space. Therefore, a building doesn't have live animals, doesn't have activity, doesn't have somebody coming and cleaning and all the stuff that goes into raising chickens. Right, and I follow chickens on Instagram because I have friends that have chickens, and it fascinates me too, Mayor, and I might have some. But I think out of courtesy to my neighbors, I think 5 feet is just too close.
Sure.
Because they do have a smell, and unless you keep that coop clean,
But do you think that an additional 5 feet is going to stop the wind from carrying any potential? I mean, I don't mean to be
No, I know.
glib about it, but, I mean, the reality is,
But it's
still 5 feet.
But it's the visual of having a structure, and having a structure 5 feet away. I mean, that's why I was trying to push for 20, but I think that's a very long stretch. But I think having at least 10 feet away, gives the appearance of it not being in somebody's back window. So again, that's what I would fight for. I'd be curious to see if they're that close, if we do get some kind of complaints about it. Again, the wind can blow in different directions, but
But there is a rule that they have to keep it clean, so,
well, we know how that goes. That's discretionary. But anyways, I'm fighting for 10 feet. I wish the rest of the council would also agree with that. I think 5 feet is just too close to your neighbors.
okay. Our irregular lots and some of our R3A areas, any idea what those sizes are that are open? I'm not saying those individuals or property owners want chickens, but I'm trying to get perspective of if the lot's only 20 feet and we force them to bring it in 10, and then 20 feet, that's a really small lot.
like 60 on the front or 100.
Madam Mayor,
Yeah.
I think that's the question I would need to know too. Like I said, I just want this to be super inclusive to everyone, and, you know, if there's a little math that could be done, hey, the rear yard setback is this. Is there a situation where it wouldn't be feasible to go to 10 feet?
Yep, Madam Mayor and Council, so I would say a majority of the R3A lots have pretty much what Councilmember Iverson was noting was that 60-foot lot width. It's usually like 60 to 70 feet. That's kind of the normal R3A lot that we see in the central core neighborhood. So we could run some math or do some examples of that.
I'm thinking of just some of these really small lots, like some of the ones in your neighborhood, right? Where we've issued some variances and they're non-conforming lots. And it's few and far between, and maybe they don't want chickens. But what I don't want to have happen is somebody wants chickens, and then they have to try and get a variance, which I do not want to see happen over some chickens, which would be horribly unfortunate and completely contrary. So would there be another, if 10 feet were to be what passes, and it didn't work for someone because of there's already a garage, a detached garage, and there's already a patio and the chickens need to be in grass, and whatever the case may be, would there be another mechanism outside of a variance to allow them to place their coops somewhere other than 10 feet? City Attorney.
Madam Mayor, no, I don't think so. This is part of the zoning ordinance and setbacks. When you want to put something within a setback, you need a variance. The only thing I'd point out, which I think you've touched upon and alluded to already, is to think about it from the other perspective. In those lots where someone does end up building something right at 5 feet, the ordinance still says that, as drafted, that they have to keep the coop in such a way that no noxious odors or unsanitary drainage impact adjacent properties. So when the permit's reviewed by staff, if it's a situation where they think that's going to happen, or there's documentation that it is happening, the odors are just really bad, I don't know how we'd go out and measure that. But so there would be potential ways to at least address those negative impacts. Aesthetically, it will be what it is, I think.
So as we think about lots, I think what I'm hearing is the yard setbacks from the left to the right, but then we have the rear yard setback. So if somebody does have a smaller lot, they could put their chicken coop off of the back of the property lot and not off of a side lot. And that would resolve that potential issue. So I think we're all thinking of it as, it has to go from the left or the right, but it could go to the rear of the house and can come 10 feet off of that. That would solve a lot of issues.
To me, that's, respectfully, I don't know what's in people's backyards, and I don't want to assume. I mean, they could have a gazebo in one corner and a garage in the other, right? I mean, having lived in R3A, they're small lots, and they were detached garages and a lot of mature trees, and trying to, I mean, they're working within confined spaces, so to me, we could find ourselves over legislating at the 10 feet. We've already kind of decided that these structures are allowed within 5 feet. So, I mean, for me, I'm okay at the 5 feet if we, I mean, again, this is a coop. What's the maximum height? Sorry.
The
4
max,
feet?
the maximum height would follow accessory structure heights too. But normally, I mean, they don't go above 10 feet.
Over the fences. Fences are only 6 feet tall,
No, we're only, well, if there's a fence.
if there's a fence.
Yeah. No, I'm totally okay. We would allow a playground structure, then those things are,
Well, I'm not comfortable with 5, and I guess to this argument that you just made, my argument back is that if they have that much stuff in their backyard, they probably shouldn't have some chickens.
oh, I don't think that, well.
So
that's
anyways,
not
I'm
for
not,
us to
I'm not
decide.
comfortable with
Yeah.
5, so
Okay.
I'm one voice here tonight.
All right.
Madam
Thank
Mayor,
you.
if I may,
Yes.
perspective. First off, I don't think this is ever going to be a problem. In the 5 feet we're talking about, it seems like we're talking about 5 feet like that applies everywhere. Well, it doesn't. It's not too many properties that 5 feet will come into play. And again, I don't believe that the people who might live in a smaller lot that has a 5-foot setback requirement now would necessarily put it right at 5 feet. But if there was such a property and people wanted to put some structure up, let's say a detached garage, I'd say that's an entirely different matter, which they can do right now, than a chicken coop, which you can basically see through it for the most part. It's like a wire fence in a way, you can see right through it. Plus, it's got some entertainment value, I think, for the neighbors. So I want to make things simple. We have a setback ordinance right now for all these things. I don't see why we should change it just for this one type of structure, which to me is not nearly as overbearing as some of the other structures that could be put in those properties right now. So I'd like to see this just the way it is.
Thank you, Councilmember Fleckish. Councilmember Parkhill.
Yeah, my understanding, just the way it is they're recommending a 10-foot setback. Isn't that what's recommended?
Staff.
That's what Planning Commission recommended. If I understood
And
correctly,
that's what staff's recommending too, right?
Right, but the way the zoning is written, it's at 5 feet.
Yeah, Madam Mayor and Council, so the zoning right now is accessory structure setbacks varies per zoning district. The smallest one is 5 feet. The Planning Commission was recommending for that, since it's 5 feet, they recommended a consistent setback for all properties at 10 feet or even 15 perhaps. That was a discussion with the Planning Commission.
Okay, so there isn't a proposal out there. This is just a recommendation.
Councilmember Parkhill, Madam Mayor, the original staff proposal, I believe, was 5. Is that correct?
The original,
To adhere to the accessories.
correct, yes.
Yes, Madam Mayor and Councilmember, I'd concur with what the city manager said, and I would say that I think what the Planning Commission said, that it should be a 10-foot minimum, but it might be greater in those other districts where there was a greater setback for accessory structures. But I think they left it for you to wrestle with, and staff's recommendation is to go with the way it was originally drafted, which is to just follow the underlying setbacks in the zoning districts.
So to go with the auxiliary building. So my thought is that we've given great consideration to the person that wants to have chickens, but what about the neighbor who doesn't want to smell the chickens? And maybe at 5 feet doesn't matter, but you have a patio in your backyard, and that patio, is 10 feet from the side yard, and, you got the neighbor's chickens right there, and I don't know. I don't know what's in people's backyard either, but I would think out of a little bit of caution, maybe the 10-foot isn't such a bad idea. And if we want to change it in 2 years to 5, great. Or if there's a big problem with it, maybe the city manager can approve it. We give him the ability, if there's no other place to put that coop, that he's able to make a modification for a particular home.
So a couple of things. I think the city manager or the city attorney just said because of the zoning, it would have to go through a variance. We do not have the authority to give that authority to the city manager. So that's.
No way to write it, huh? There's no, okay.
No. Second, from someone who has spent her entire life, I'm not going to go through how many years, every summer on a farm with not 4 chickens, many, many, many chickens. I can tell you, chickens were the least smelly things out there. And we're talking about 4. Now, we have people that have dogs. We don't dictate, these are less noisy. We don't dictate how often people clean up after their dogs. We don't, if dogs bark, we don't tell people they must have a 6-foot-tall fence for their dog. People will treat them like pets. They're not. Some people consider them farm animals, and for commercial purposes, yes. But I think what we're talking about here, they're going to be more along the lines of pets. We're probably going to see nicer coops than, we're in Wayzata, for goodness sakes, right? These are going to be some
That's why I don't want to tear them
fancy.
down, so that's my other point.
And so I would like your suggestion. I too would not be in favor of forcing removal of the coop. We don't force removal of a playground structure or a gazebo when people stop sitting in there. So I think we have to trust that people are going to use some common sense. We also said as a council, we would try this. We can adjust it and pivot if we see that there's an issue at some point. And get a report back from staff. Let's see how things go after a year and after 2 years. And if things need adjustment, just like we did today for the tree preservation ordinance, then let's fine tune and adjust. But, I think I've gotten 2 emails in 5 years for people who wanted chickens. So I really don't, I'm not concerned.
I'm fine if that's the direction we want to go.
Okay. So we have the proposal before us with a couple recommendations. We are not in favor of the minimum lot size. It sounds like a majority of the council, there's some discussion back and forth. Majority of the council is in agreement with staff's recommendation on the current setback based on zoning. Did I state that properly? Not in favor of an additional fence height, because the containment would address that. And then renewal, I am okay not going with the renewal and trust that if we feel that we need to adjust it, we can going forward. So no renewal, no renewal, no renewal, no?
That's fine.
You're okay with that?
Renewal.
You want a renewal, okay. And then how about forcing the removal of the coop? I'm not in favor of forcing removal. Personally, that's too,
I'm okay keeping them.
Was that anywhere in
keeping
our,
the removal?
No, keeping the coops.
Keeping the coops, okay.
was that in any of our recommendations?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember, it's point 12 of the proposed ordinance, D12, I believe.
No, Councilmember Parkhill brought it up,
That's what I thought.
yeah.
And for clarification, Mayor, Councilmember, that I think Councilmember Parkhill's recommendation was to strike 12.
Strike 12,
Yeah.
yes. How would the rest of the council feel about that? We have a majority in favor? Okay. So, considering this would be the first reading of the ordinance, may we make a motion outlining the direction that we want to go on, well, why don't you just tell me, city attorney, how we should structure this rather than try and guess?
Sure, Madam Mayor, Council. So what's before you is draft ordinance number 837, amending Chapter 930, Animals of the Wayzata City Code to allow for keeping of chickens. And I think you could ask for a motion, Madam Mayor, to adopt the ordinance number 837 as presented with any of the amendments you think you have consensus for. And I may have only heard one or two. So for example, you could say with the elimination of D12, if you wanted to remove that requirement that the chicken coop and chicken run need to be removed if the permit goes away.
So the 4 items that were listed that had been brought up by the planning commission, we do not need to incorporate up, down, or?
Correct, Madam Mayor. Those, staff did not include those recommended conditions because, as Mr. Keyser pointed out, we felt more discussion was needed about that at the council level. So if you don't want to adopt any of those recommended conditions of the Planning Commission and just eliminate 12, you would move to adopt the first reading of Ordinance 837 with the elimination of D12.
Okay. And if everybody keep me on the straight and narrow here, please. It sounded as if, based on my notes, we had some for and against for each of the 4, but there wasn't a preponderance of a majority wanting any of those items that were proposed by Planning Commission.
Correct.
That-
Than me.
Right, a majority of the council, correct. Okay. All right, so how about a motion to approve the first reading of ordinance 837 City Code amendments related to the keeping of chickens with the striking of item 12?
D12.
D12, Delta 12.
Correct, Madam Mayor.
And Madam Mayor, I'd like to make that motion to approve the first reading of this ordinance 837 City Code amendments related to keeping of chickens, but striking item D12.
Thank you, Councilmember Pluckish, and a second.
Second.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, if I could just may.
Yes.
I watched the Planning Commission discuss this and read the notes, and I just wanted to point out that there was not really a consensus of the Planning Commission of these 4 items. Basically, what they were saying is that they weren't unified behind them, and they thought the city council could discuss it just like we did.
Yep.
So they weren't necessarily recommendations, it's just take a look at this stuff. So,
I appreciate that. Thank you. Councilmember Iverson?
I am going to vote for it because I do think people should have an opportunity to have chickens. And I think that residents have heard that I am not comfortable with the 5-foot setback. And hopefully we don't have to have this discussion again in the future. Because if there are complaints, I will bring it up, but I hope there isn't.
No, that's a really, really good point. We do have a commitment from staff that we'll keep an eye on things, we'll take some notes, we'll bring things back to council if anything needs to be addressed or amended, and similarly to our tree preservation ordinance. Very good. Okay, we have a motion and a second.
can I get a second?
Yes, we got a second. We had some discussion. Okay, how about all those in favor say aye? Aye. Opposed? Okay, I was going to say, buck, buck, chickie.
We got chickens.
Motion passes. Motion passes. Oh my gosh, this was years in the making as well. Congratulations, Mr. Keyser.
Oh, thank you.
I know, that it was emotional.
Oh, yeah, it was
Ups
a
and
roller coaster,
downs.
Well, the quote of the night has got to go to Councilmember Parkhill about having
chicken
chicken
pot
pot pie. My goodness.
I think chicken's officially off the menu in Wayzata.
Not just all about the egg.
No, I am, I'm very excited. I'm excited for the families who have been waiting for this for a long time, including the kids. And like I said, I'm jealous. I've been wanting chickens for a long time, but I can't where I live. So I wish all the future chicken keepers a lot of success and happiness. And we expect pictures of little chicks. The education will be a huge component, Nick. So I don't know if people, when they come in for their permits or on the website, if we can post some of these great links. And in the event they happen to get a rooster, they'll need to rehome the rooster. So that'll have to be very clear and succinct, front and center on the website.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, and a bunch of communities have videos and other resources and stuff that we're probably gonna copy.
Can borrow from. Wonderful. Good luck.
Thanks.
They are great for the environment too, right?
They eat a lot of
Bugs.
wood ticks.
Yes, they do. That's a very good point. So Gale Woods Farm, which is part of Three Rivers Park District, it's out in Minnetrista. If anybody, I don't know if they're familiar with it. Phenomenal place, all kind of regenerative farming practices, and they have camp for kids. But what they do is they take chickens, and so what's left from the chickens, I'm just going to leave it at that, is really good for the soil, and they eat a lot of bugs and weeds. So it's very good. So people have their little hand trucks. I have looked into chickens for a long time, so I think it's great. Okay, we are done with new business, and we are on to the city manager's report, and he looks very happy to update us on all things city related.
I'm just ecstatic, Madam Mayor. It's a seminal moment for the community.
It is.
Yeah.
I know. Congratulations, Councilmember Fleckish. She brought it to us 6 years ago.
Seems like 100.
I know.
And again, props to Parks Environment Planner Keyser for, this has been a journey, and he's really done a great job of trying to figure out a good solution and engaging folks, so thanks, Nick. Okay, a few things I just want to point out. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., the community is going to mourn, recognize, celebrate, appreciate Peggy Douglas, who passed away recently. That's at the community church. I believe there's a happy hour type event afterwards at the country club. As many as the mayor very eloquently notified the community at the last meeting, Peggy passed away, and she was a longtime member of the Planning Commission, longtime Wayzata Chamber president, and just overall champion, advocate, and all-around good person of Wayzata. So I'm sure I'm sure it'll be standing room only, just knowing Peggy and how many lives she impacted in the community. And
That's at
greater
what
area.
time?
3 p.m.
Okay.
On Thursday, the HPB will be conducting a Centennial Home Celebration from 5 to 7 here at City Hall. It's an RSPV event, and I think you can call Val at City Hall if anybody's interested in attending. But it's really intended to catch up on recognition of all the 100-year homes in the community. We haven't done this in about 10 years, so I know that we're going to have a lot of homeowners that have 100-year-old homes or greater. So everybody that owns a home that's that age will be invited, and the recent ones over the past 10 years will be given a specific award. So kind of a cool thing we haven't done in a while. So this is an open invitation to the council to attend if you're able to. That's, again, from 5 to 7. There'll be a happy hour. We don't do things in Wayzata without a happy hour. So that's at 5, and then the program will start at 6 o'clock here in the community room. Last week was National Police Week, a special week for us, not only just as a municipality, but just we love our police department, and we've, obviously suffered two heartbreaking losses of our force. On the 15th, it was Peace Officers Memorial Day, and we recognized Officer Matthews, of course, and then Sergeant J.W. Anderson. We had some flowers, as we always do, out on the memorial, and I know it's a special day, just recognizing, how grateful we are to have our current police force and just officers who have given the ultimate sacrifice here in Wayzata. So I want to mention that important weekend day for our community, and this week is National Public Works Week. This time of year, especially with all the rain, is when everything grows quickly, so we're trying to keep up with everything, but it's a good kind of reminder of all the hard work our Public Works crew does, all the way from Mike all the way down to everybody else. They're hardworking, and we appreciate the heck out of them, whether it's this time of year or when they're plowing snow in the winter, when they're unclogging or fixing a sewer repair at 3 a.m. on a chilly January day. They do it all. We appreciate them.
It's also EMS week.
Wow, I didn't know that.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, props to them as well.
Yeah. All of our hardworking ambulance workers and
Yes.
first responders.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because there have been issues with staffing and response times, just given the current market. I'll have to say that we haven't had those issues here in Wayzata, so we're really grateful for the service we get from our, I believe it's North that
North Memorial.
runs our service. Yeah.
Yeah. They do great work here and provide great service, and it's a tough job.
Yeah.
And we talk about police and fire, but we don't talk about our paramedics very often and how difficult a job they have. So,
Right.
yeah, they do. And we consider our public works crews our first responders also. When the power goes out and the lift stations need to keep operating, and
Yep.
they keep things flowing the right way, right?
I think
And that's a way.
And I recall when we did our community survey a couple of years ago, our just overall, whether it's parks or sewer, the overall satisfaction of our community was pretty close to 100%, which the consultant was like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this before. So speaks to Mike and all his team over there.
Absolutely.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Everson.
Since Bennett's here, I don't get to see you very often. Do you know when the trees are going to be replaced up in Heritage Park by the flagpole?
Councilmember, that's a great question. I sent an email to our contractor this morning. We are expecting that to be early June. That's as specific as I've got for you.
And what species are you planting?
Those are going to be Capitata Yews.
And so height and width?
They'll be installed 6 feet to start. Maturity can depend on the site, but 12 to 15 feet. I think they're planting 13 of them.
Wow, a lot.
Yeah.
The other question is, do you need some volunteers to help maintain the gardens up there?
Always, yeah. That's
You never
always
say no to
appreciated.
volunteers.
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk, and maybe we could try to get some people together. It needs a little love, doesn't it?
Yep, that'd be fantastic.
Okay, I'll call you. And then the other question I have, since it's the end of the month, and I'll ask it again the end of June, have we received any of the $220,000 from the Conservancy?
Good question. We're waiting on getting that payment till when the project needs to be closed out, which should be around July. They have indicated that they're well over halfway there. So we expect to get that full amount in July when the project is closed out.
Yep, I saw that, so I'll ask again at the end of June if we're on track.
I'll probably say the same thing at the end of June, but July will be different.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I love it. And the Friday before, just a heads up to staff, we were talking about special event permits and coordination with community. The Friday before Father's Day, you have Hope Kids. They go out to Big Island, and they use our docks to bring the families back. Has anybody reached out yet on that?
Not that I know of, but
Okay. I did tell them, we have new docks. You're gonna have to coordinate closely with staff. So it's the Friday before Father's Day, and they just, I guess, have dedicated time to, or space to load and unload families and children who are headed to Big Island for their big day.
cool.
Okay.
We'll definitely work with them.
All right, wonderful. All right, that's all I have. Anything from anybody else? No? All right, how about a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And a second?
Second?
First and second, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Motion passes.